They used to say Britain was a land of rolling hills and freedom's hard-won. But today, drones patrol the rural skies. CCTV towers pierce the horizon like silver thorns. And a silent war, fought not with bombs, but with biometric scanners and social scorecards, has begun. In a parliamentary session now echoing across the continent, U.S., Senator J.D. Vance didn't mince his words. What Labor is building isn't a country, it's a digital gulag. Behind him, a reel of damning footage played facial recognition tests running quietly in Kent villages, police knocking on doors over online speech, farmers forced to scan biometric IDs just to refuel their tractors. This isn't fiction. It's Starmer's Britain the Senator continued. You're criminalizing dissent and rewarding dependency. That's not governance, that's digital feudalism. And he's right. Labor isn't digitizing services. They're digitizing control of land, licenses, livelihoods. The gulf between the government and the governed has never been wider, and the countryside now finds itself under siege by a metropolitan elite wielding code instead of compassion. The average Brit may not have noticed. But those in the soil, farmers, truckers, builders have. And they aren't staying silent anymore. It started with a promise, progress, efficiency, digital convenience. That's how oppressive regimes always sell their first lines of code. One by one, they introduce system after system, until you wake up in a world where you need permission to milk a cow. Starmer's Labor didn't begin its war on farmers with soldiers. It started with scanners, logins, and quiet legislation passed when most were asleep. In 2025, the rollout of the UK digital ID seemed harmless enough. A digital passport for accessing government services. What could go wrong? But today, from Devon to Yorkshire, you need it to buy feed, to access subsidies, to transport goods. And if you don't have it, your account is flagged. Your farm isn't authorized. At the same time, the Bank of England's central bank digital currency began quiet infrastructure tests. No one paid much attention, until small meat processors in Lincolnshire couldn't get payment tools cleared because their systems weren't digitally verified. They didn't close down because demand was low. They shut because Trust Score Framework flagged them as non-integrated. Then the farming equipment started becoming ID-locked. A tractor isn't just a tractor anymore. It's a biometric access platform now. One respected dairy family in Wales was locked out of £170,000 of equipment after missing a compliance deadline on facial ID. People asked, why? Who benefits? But the answer was predictable. Facial recognition software contracts have been traced back to American giants, Vanguard, BlackRock, and a host of labor-linked advisory NGOs, quietly sitting on boards for the very regulation committees approving these schemes. The digital ID platforms aren't publicly owned. They're privatized, for-profit, and backed by donors who wine and dine in London while regulating the countryside into silence. This is about safety, Labor insisted, but safety for whom? Because the producers, the actual workers, weren't protected. They were monitored, watched, complied, tagged. There's another reality. These systems rarely apply to the protected classes, never to the migrant hotels, never to the politicians' procurement buddies, never to global capital. They throw £400 a week into luxury hotels for migrant claimants, but spend £850 per enforcement officer tagging facial scanners to tractors. As one farmhand said, we're scanned like cattle and treated worse than them. Where did this new obsession come from? A leaked Home Office memo in late 2025 gave us horrifying insight. Titled Behavioral Risk Indicators by Region, it suggested that resistance to digital compliance in rural districts may indicate underlying radicalization tendencies, and recommended flagging social posts that include pictures of biometric blockers or flags reading "farmers over firewalls." Read that again. If you refuse to scan your face to access your own 200-acre land, you might be listed on a farmer watch list. One line from the memo still haunts those who read it. The persistent self-reliance culture in rural land workers creates risks to future digital integration strategies. That is not policy. That is ideological warfare. And this is what J.D. Vance meant when he said digital gulag. Because that's exactly what a gulag is, not just bound by fences but by permissions. By checkpoints built of chips, not chains. In Wiltshire, a fourth-generation farmer was raided at 6 a.m. on suspicion of coordinated digital obstruction. His crime? He helped 3 other farmers install manual overrides to bypass the compulsory biometric ignition scanners for their combines. No theft, no violence. Just men trying to do their job. Now he's banned from participating in DEFRA's subsidy platform for 5 years. And yet, as labor pushed harder, the countryside began to push back. It began with refusal. Then came the rebellion. In Durham, a convoy of 13 tractors blockaded the Regional Ministry of Agriculture office. In Kent, face-scanning kiosks installed at 2 supply hubs were torched by members of the so-called Free Hands Front, a grassroots group of farmers and truckers who refused to integrate with the surveillance grid. Across dozens of protests, the chant echoed, "Our land, our hands, not your scanners." These weren't political operatives. These were fathers, mothers, sons, builders, growers, meat cutters, people with dirt beneath their nails and nothing left to surrender. Labor's response? Silence on major media, criminal proceedings in the shadows. Even an absurd government campaign branding these people as far-right agitators masquerading as farmers. But the cameras are rolling now. Independent journalists are documenting what's happening in places like Herefordshire. Elderly farmers locked out of their own seed silos because they refused to complete digital profile onboarding. Starmer's technocrats write it off as operational friction. But what this truly is systemic cleansing of the independent class. Displace the farmers, digitally strangle the hauliers, regulate the small butchers and breeders until they break. And once they're gone, the land doesn't vanish. It just gets bought, quietly, by global consortiums, investment boards in Davos, NGOs with vague missions and black budgets. But here's the good news: the spirit of resistance is growing faster than the state can contain. Where one kiosk burns, 10 others tremble. Where one convoy is stopped, another reroutes. What labor doesn't understand is this: you cannot treat the working class like code, because code doesn't bleed, people do. And the people who build, who grow, who move, they are no longer interested in permission slips from parasites. Because when control becomes this precise, this manic, and this personal, revolution becomes not radical, but rational. When the shelves emptied, London finally looked up. First it was eggs, then pork, then fresh milk. Shops started limiting checkout items. Delivery trucks ran late or didn't arrive at all, and yet no bomb went off. No factory burned down. It was something far simpler and far more terrifying. The producers had stopped producing. Across the countryside, farms that weren't digitally compliant were locked out of supply chains. Without verified license renewals, abattoirs couldn't operate. Smallholders selling to independent grocers were threatened with permanent exclusion from the digital agriculture network, a system now required to sell at market. In Sheffield, a butcher with a 30-year career was fined and shut down for unauthorized payment gateways. Translation: he accepted cash and off-platform bank transfers. To labor, that's heresy. 5 days. That's how long it took from this bureaucratic chokehold to a noticeable drop in supermarket availability. Not because there wasn't food, but because the people who make it happen, the hands in the fields, in the trucks, in the abattoirs, were digitally severed, shut out by the very system they once fed. This wasn't disruption. This was economic exile imposed by a machine that no longer needs your vote, just your data, your compliance, and your silence. But silence is hard to demand in a nation built on pubs, protests, and pressmen. In a small Welsh village, the 7th-generation Morgan family found their dairy license revoked without warning. Their crime: publicly opposing biometric calf registration. Within a week, their milk went to waste. Local news didn't cover it. But the story caught fire on social media after their teenage daughter posted 4 words alongside a photo of spoiling Vance. "He died for this." She was talking about her grandfather, who fought in Korea, built the farm they stood on, died in the same room they now watched turn bankrupt. Her post was shared 2 million times, and that's when it shifted from silent frustration to something more dangerous: defiance. Nurses who'd been forced onto centralized ID platforms to continue working began speaking out online. Hauliers, long regulated and taxed into exhaustion, refused to upgrade their biometric fuel pass systems. Shop owners nailed hand-painted signs in their windows: no control, no compliance, no digital CHAINS. The state hit back, but the more they scolded, the more people rebelled. When J.D. Vance stepped back into the conversation, it exploded. Footage of him addressing a crowd in Birmingham, flanked by British farmers and postal strikers, hit every feed not already throttled by algorithmic suppression. He didn't whisper, "If your government says you can't buy bread without scanning your face, that is no longer a democracy." What Starmer is building isn't reform. It's regime. Those words, "This is a regime" became stickers in chip vans and petrol pumps, scribbled on post boxes and slapped onto clamp rails across Essex and Weymouth. Farmers began calling the new enforcement teams the digerati, digital enforcers with power but no soul. In a leaked recording from Cabinet Security Planning, an advisor warned, "If the rural class wins the cultural war, we lose the control necessary to stabilize universal integration." Let that sink in. Farmers and butchers are now seen as enemies of stabilization. They aren't rebelling for fame or ideology. They're fighting because they're being erased. One Scottish crofter, unable to access fertilizer due to non-refresh credentials, showed a journalist his fields. Rotting, dead grass, scarred earth. "They told me I could reapply in 3 months. But you can't reapply for the rain, can you?" Another woman, a 62-year-old widow from Norfolk, was arrested for suspected incitement after sharing advice in a gardening group about growing non-licensed crops outside the smart farming scheme. Her family's garden was bulldozed for non-compliant soil usage. That's how far it's gone. And while the mainstream media stayed silent or sided with the regime, the people filled the void. Citizen streamers, the new scribes, captured everything. From police zip-tying pensioners at roadblocks to convoy standoffs on the M25 while crowds chanted, "You're not essential, we are." And everywhere, J.D. Vance's final warning echoed. This isn't Left V's right. This is freedom versus total control. Digital feudalism is here. If you don't rise now, your children won't inherit land, they'll inherit a login. The rebellion at its heart was never about tech. It was about ownership. It was about asking, who owns this land? Who owns your tractor? Who owns your time? Who owns your speech? Who owns your body? Because the answer isn't you anymore, not unless you say no. And now across Britain they are saying it. Quietly in corner shops, loudly in field reports, boldly in chants flying across motorways and moorlands. We are not objects. We are not data. We are the hands that hold this country up. And if the government continues to act like digital landlords managing human tenants, there will be consequences beyond elections. The final line in this epic of betrayal is not yet written. But it might just be this: if you can't harvest your land without permission, it's not your land. It's rented freedom. Remember that. Because tomorrow your field might be next. Your job might be next. Your child's schooling, your heating, your medicine, tuned to a score. Managed by an app, revoked at the flick of an unelected finger. And when that happens, it won't matter how polite you were. It will matter how early you fought back. So start now, say no.